এতিয়া কথাটো হৈছে যে কোনো যে হেৰি দিয়া নাই অনলাইন কৰিছে নে নাই
forward to organize this two-day international conference in collaboration with WWF. I would like to thank the Department of English. I would like to thank
Indigenous wisdom is grounded in what we call law of the land and not law of man. With these words by Professor Anne Poelin, I wish everyone a very warm good morning. Respected Principal Sir, Governing Body President, distinguished guests, esteemed keynote speaker, faculty members, and enthusiastic participant from Sri Lanka, welcome to the International Conference on Environment and Indigenous Knowledge System in South Asian Context, organized by Department of English in collaboration with IQAC of our college and WWF-India. We are honored to have you here to share knowledge, foster collaboration, and spark innovation in the field of environment and indigenous knowledge. I am Mridula Kaishyap, the convener of this conference, and will be your host for this intellectual journey today. To initiate this auspicious occasion, I would like to request our GB President, Dr. Horat Hazarika, Principal, Dr. Kulen Chandra Das, Inaugurator, Dr. Anupam Sharma, our keynote speaker, Professor Charmali Nahalage, and a plenary speaker, Deepak Gawali, to grace on the dais. Thank you, everyone. Our faculty member, Prarthana Hazarika, from the Department of SMEs, I request her to felicitate our GB President, Sir Horat Dutta, with a Fulam Gamucha. Thank you. Now I request Leena Bora Hazari from the Department of Economics to felicitate our Principal Sir with a Fulam Gamucha. I request Dr. Junali Mudoy from the Department of Education to felicitate our inaugurator, Dr. Anupam Sharma, with a Fulam Gamucha, the college memento, and a pack of books. I now take the privilege to call our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Sanchita Bora, to felicitate our keynote speaker, Professor Charmali Nahalage, with a Fulam Gamucha. A college memento, a pack of books, a heartfelt drawing which I painted for her, and a bag of tea leaves which has been gifted to us by Mr. Sanjeev Bora, I think he is not present now. He is associated with Huge Juti Small Tea Growers Development Society and also our IQAC member, and and this product is a harvest of his own garden, tea garden. Now I take the privilege to call our Vice Principal Ma'am, Moromi Gayon Baido, to felicitate Mr. Deepak Gawali with a Fulam Gamucha. A pack of books, our college memento, and my small heartfelt drawing for him. And a tea bag. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Now I request our GB President, Sir, Horad Dottot, to enlighten us with a few words.
Respected Principal, Nowgong Girls College, inaugurator of the seminar conference, Dr. Anupam Sharma, Sarmili Nahalage from Sri Lanka, Deepak Gayali from Nepal, resource person, dignitaries, participants, teaching and non-teaching staff of the college, and student friends. First of all, I welcome all of you in this two-day international conference on environment and indigenous knowledge system in South Asian context, organized by this college in collaboration with IQAC of the college, WWF-India, and SBI Nowgong branch. This today, all the participants have presented their papers, and I hoped some new thoughts will be come out. Indigenous knowledge system of South Asian, mostly belonging to the tribal peoples or the Adivasi peoples, comprising the area of Burma, Bhutan, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Nepal, etc. In India itself, a huge amount is under this South Asia region, particularly in the Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, some part of Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, etc. Indigenous knowledge, I do not like to elaborately about the subject, but I would like to share my views, my experience on the subject. When I passed my MSc course, I have taken an individual project about the preparation of county liquor by the Adivasi peoples in the North Himalayan region, that is the lower Himalayan region of Koilamari and Johing area. Generally, tribal peoples are used 14 different types of herbs and roots for preparation of milk powder cake, for preparation of this local liquor, which is very delicious drink among them. When I observe and investigate, I have investigated only 10 numbers of these species, herbal species, but rest 4 numbers I could not investigate it, because that particular area where I got investigated, the Adivasi peoples are very much sensitive to sharing their knowledge with others. As a result, I left this project. And on my journey in the lower Nepha area, that is Subansiri area, where the Adivasi peoples are lived, the Nisi tribes are lived there, I saw one of the interesting things of their night sleeping pattern. When they sleep, one's head is placed another feet, and his feet is placed by another head, like that. The Nisi people generally used cap in their head, which is made of bamboo and certain other varieties. When the Nisi people take one arrow in his head, then it is believed that he is married one person, one woman. If he take 2 arrows in his head, small arrow, then it is believed that he married 2 women, or like that. I observed another interesting things about their fooding system, food habit. One kind of silly, when it is broken, it smells so nicely that automatically salivary gland will come out. And with some tubers, they consume a large amount of rice as their lunch and in their dinner. These are the peculiar things I have observed during my investigation. And in the Santhal peoples, generally village witches use folklore medicines for their ailment. Lezula fortis, Euphorbia spinosa, these types of species used by the village witch to prepare the sterilization medicine. Like that, They have prepared certain folklore medicines for treatment of their ailment, but they have no knowledge about how to eradicate the disease malaria. As a result, most of the tribal peoples of ancient time died on malaria. Now the situation is different, and they are now civilized. But when I observed in 1984-85, then I saw that they do not use cloth. They use only leaves and certain barks as their dress, and certain times of seeds are also they used as ornament. Generally, the omens are use certain type of seeds as ornaments. So there are vast knowledge among them. They know how technique of shifting cultivations, how the irrigation pattern is made. They have clear idea. So I think in this today's seminar, the participants with their deliberation have documented certain things about the indigenous knowledge system. And its proper documentation is very need of these hours. And I wish my best wishes to the participants for these 2 days. And with the deliberations of the resource person, participants, I hoped this conference will become a success. I once again offer my best wishes to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request our principal, sir, to formally welcome the gathering with his profound words.
Good morning, all of you. Respected Dr. Kharat Datta, President, Governing Body of our college, Dr. Anupam Sharma, Team Leader, Brahmaputra Landscape, WWF-India, Dr. Chamali Nahalage, the keynote speaker, Mr. Deepak Gawali from Nepal, who will deliver the plenary lecture here. Invited guests from different parts of our state, members of the WWF, LBCS, participants from different colleges of our state, my dear students, a hearty welcome to all of you to this 2-day international conference on environment and indigenous knowledge system in South Asian context. Friends, we know that the environment is, the earth is, our world is passing through a very crucial phase of environmental crisis over the past several decades. The ever-increasing world population, along with its escalating demands for different stuffs, are demanding more of the natural resources to be extracted from the Earth's core. The Earth is providing us very crucial ecosystem services without which we cannot think of surviving in this world. But in the process of extraction of these natural resources, we are basically not following the sustainability rule, and at the same time we also have ignored what the famous American economist Kenneth Boulding speaks about this earth. He termed this earth as not as a cowboy economy, but a spaceship economy. A spaceship economy means basically an economy with limited quantity of resources. But we, the Homo sapiens, are ignoring these warnings of Professor Kenneth Boulding and this very principle of the limited quantity of resources, and therefore the environmental crises are popping up in the form of global warming and climate change, etc. Of late, what we have been observing is that the economic policies are being driven by greed of a few sections of the society, and therefore deepening the crisis and exacerbating the whole situation. The damage has already been done to the environment. In this context, the environmental economists, the environmental scientists, and the natural lovers are actually finding some way how to repair this damage. And that, in that particular moment, the indigenous knowledge system gains the momentum. We know that the indigenous knowledge system basically helps to conserve the forest, conserve the biodiversity. And while talking about the indigenous knowledge system, we can refer some examples of the northern region. If we can mention about, Sir has already mentioned about some tribes. If you can mention about the wet rice cultivation, which is practiced by Apaternate tribes interspersed with fish, then we can also mention about the elder cultivation by the farmers of Nagaland. We can also talk about the drip irrigation system that's prevalent in Meghalaya. Also a Langsor system. We have lots of Karbi students, they know about Langsor. This is again a drip irrigation system using bamboo pipes. Then we also have different faiths, myths, etc. Circulated around the forest and biodiversity. We have the sacred grove practices, we have sacred space practices, we have Baidam, which is again a practice practiced by the Bodo people. We have CCA, community conserved areas, again practiced by the Bodo people, Garo people, Rabha people in the western part of Assam, and many more. There's a long list of such kind of myths and practices. I know, or we know, that many of such myths and belief system doesn't have any scientific underpinnings, but at the same time, knowing that also, we need to encourage this system because it helps conserving the biodiversity, it helps conserving the ecosystem, it helps conserving the forest. In this particular context, our Department of English of our college and IQAC has come forward to organize this 2-day international conference in collaboration with WWF. I would like to thank the Department of English. I would like to thank the WWF and also would like to thank SBI and Oil India for their generous financial assistance, without which this workshop wouldn't have been, this conference wouldn't have been possible. And I also thank the conveners and co-conveners who has put tireless efforts to make this happen. And I also wish the participant, I believe that the participants from different parts of the state and different parts of the country who have assembled here will have meaningful time exchanging their ideas, exchanging their findings of their research. And I welcome you all once again and conclude my speech here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your informative lecture. And we know everyone, I mean, he has been actively associated with environment over the years. Now I request our IQAC coordinator, Dr. Sanchita Bora, to deliver a few words.
A very good morning to everyone present here. It gives me immense pleasure to warmly welcome all the distinguished guests, respected resource persons, scholars, delegates, participants, and dear colleagues and students to this conference organized by the Department of English of our college in collaboration with WWF India. It is both an honor and a responsibility to speak on a subject that is not only intellectually significant but also existentially urgent. We all know that Southeast Asia is one of the most ecologically diverse regions in the world, but at the same time, it's equally important is that the cultural diversity which accompanies this ecological richness. Today, we stand at crossroads. Climate change, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and unsustainable development practices are posing serious challenges. In this context, revisiting and revitalizing indigenous knowledge systems is not merely an academic exercise, it is a practical necessity. Unfortunately, there is a misunderstanding that indigenous knowledge systems are primitive and outdated. Rather, they are dynamic, evolving, and context-specific bodies of knowledge developed through generations. One of the most remarkable aspects of indigenous knowledge system is that it's a holistic worldview, but indigenous knowledge systems or indigenous knowledge should not be exploited for commercial gains. The goal is not to romanticize the past, but to build a sustainable future by combining the strength of traditional wisdom and modern science also. We hope this conference would be a significant platform for bringing together academics, researchers, environmentalists, policymakers, and community voices to reflect upon one of the most urgent concerns of our time, that is the relationship between environment and indigenous knowledge. We are indeed honored by the presence of eminent speakers and experts who have joined us to share their valuable insights and experiences. Their contributions will certainly enrich our understanding and inspire fruitful discussion over these 2 days. Here, I would like to express our heartfelt thanks and gratitude to WWF India and SBI for collaborating with us in organizing this important academic event. Such partnerships definitely strengthen our collective commitments towards environmental awareness, conservation, and sustainable development. I am confident that this conference will provide an excellent opportunity for intellectual exchange, mutual learning, and meaningful dialogue. Let us use this occasion to explore new perspectives, build academic connections, and reaffirm our responsibility towards nature and indigenous communities. Let us remember that sustainability is not just about conserving resources. It is about preserving relationships between human and nature, between tradition and innovation, and between present and future generation. With these words, I, Sanchita Bora, on behalf of IQAC Nowgong Girls College, once again welcome you all to this international conference. May this conference be a resounding success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words. Now I request Dr. Anupam Sharma to deliver the inaugural speech. He is associated with WWF as a team leader of the Brahmaputra Landscape India. Sir, please.
Good morning. Namaskar. First of all, I really feel privileged to be here, and thank you, the organizer of this workshop, for having us here and giving us the opportunity to interact with this experts on the dais as well as the young minds sitting here. I'm really happy to see a lot of actually students sitting here, and I hope this will continue till the end of the workshop and you all will participate in this and try and learn different things, new things over this 2 days workshop. Thank you. First of all, respected Principal Dr. Kulen Chandra Das, GB President Sri Farad Dutta, our guest, respected Professor Chamali Nahalage, Senior Professor from the Department of Anthropology, University of Sri Jayawardhanepura, Sri Lanka, Mr. Deepak Gayali sir, from the Nepal Academy of Sciences and Technology and former chair, Nepal Water Conservation Foundation and former Minister, Water Resources, Nepal. The faculty members of this college, and I have seen number of familiar faces from different conservation organizations, including LBCS, and my dear students of this college and faculty members. Few of our already previous speakers have spoken about a crisis that we are entering into. Believe me, we have only one Earth, right? In this huge cosmic ocean, there is only one blue planet, that is Earth, right? Is there anything else? Do we need another planet for us? Do we need another planet? But we are destroying this planet, right? The way we are consuming the resources available in Earth, we are actually destroying it. There are a lot of literature, a lot of research already done on that. And the way we are utilizing or misusing the resources is actually going to destroy it. It's not going to be suitable for human habitation. Already Principal sir has spoken about the ecosystem services that the Earth provides. Is it going to be sustainable the way we are using it? No. Right? So that is why we are probably trying to look back at our indigenous knowledge system, how our forefathers used to use the resources, use the various natural resources, and where have we actually done wrong, right? We are trying to look back and learn from what it was, what our traditional knowledge system was. You see, today we are gathering, all of you are here. I believe we are not here just merely discuss an academic topic, right? We are also trying to see and engage with a worldview, right? Which was actually never adequately discussed. That is the traditional knowledge system we have. Because the modern science or the Western science, I would be more specific, generally try to see this as a more, like for example, the term environment. It is reduced to a mere scientific matrix rather than, recognizing this as a physical and spiritual tapestry of human existence. Because this is something much broader. This is something much broader. What you see, what you find in the textbook is not. This is what you feel about the environment, what you feel about your surroundings. Is not. That is what, it is much more complex, it is much more actually kind of spiritual in a way you can say. there has been a number of examples about the indigenous knowledge systems we have. For the indigenous communities in Southeast Asia, particularly in Southeast Asia, the land was never just a resource, it was a relative. The land, you know, the land, I mean the resources, the nature, it was a relative. Yet, the history shows us that the colonial powers did not just exploit the soil or the land, they exploited the mind as well. You know, it is very different from what possibly 2000 years ago, how we used to utilize our resources and what we are doing it today. The way we are doing it today is very different. But sadly, we don't have many, written evidences. What is there is just the verbal, knowledge that is being transferred from generations. And the Western world, by labeling the indigenous knowledge as primitive or folkloric or in a way unscientific, they try to create a hierarchy that justifies the destruction already been done to the globe, right? And you see, our traditional wisdom, what we say traditional wisdom, it is mainly a spiritual journey. It is through songs, stories, maybe some traditional practices, which was, maybe a section of Western academia try to dismiss it as, primitive. They give more weightage to the words rather than the lived experience, because we didn't write it. Our traditional wisdom, we didn't write it properly, so that evidence are not there. There are there, but then it is not adequate. So that is why it is called unscientific. It is folkloric. So even the word, the mythology, the myth. What is the myth? Myth means, what is the myth? Which is not scientific. But lot of our traditional practices are related to myths, right? So there is a dichotomy. There has been examples of traditional knowledge. For example, we spoke about some utilitarian aspects of some plants, then some agriculture practices. I have seen a very interesting traditional practices of water harvesting system in our Bodoland districts in that is called Dong, where they train the water from the mountains and bring it down in the Bhabar regions. So similarly, there are sacred groups. Our principal sir has already mentioned. So so these knowledges are there, right? But then I have also seen many uses of many plants or even the animal parts or animal derivatives for treatment, for example. So these traditional practices are there, and these are still being practiced in parts of this globe. But then when we say traditional practices, we are also aware that we are sitting on a biodiversity hotspot, right? This is Eastern Himalaya is a biodiversity hotspot. But at the same time, we are also saying that this is a very fragile, ecologically a very fragile region also. Because of the rich biodiversity, we are exploiting it, and we are also losing. Our biodiversity is also degrading. But how we can bring all this, traditional knowledge and use it more judiciously, use it more sustainably, all our resources. Just a couple of other examples I just want to give. One is that while working in Arunachal, I found that there are a number of tribes who harvest bamboos, right? We all use bamboos. We all use bamboo. And when they harvest bamboo, particularly for construction purpose, they use it only before the full moon, Purnima. before the Purnima or before the full moon, they harvest. So we tried to see why they do this. What could be the possible scientific base? And later on, we realized that this is because the sugar content, that is, the carbohydrate content in the bamboo, because bamboo is entirely green, and it photosynthesis, heavy photosynthesis takes place, and the content of sugar in the plant increases with the lunar cycle till the full moon, and then it goes down. That means when during the full moon the sugar content in the plant is maximum, and after that it goes down. So when the sugar content will be more, and if you harvest it during that season, there is the higher possibility that there will be much more microbial infection or the fungus attack even. But the moment it goes down, the possibility of those infection goes down, and the bamboo will last longer. So that is the possible scientific proof. But then they have been doing it, they have been practicing it traditionally for ages without knowing the scientific. But they know that if I harvest the bamboo before full moon, it will last longer. They use bamboo for generations. Similarly, I have also seen they don't do fishing in certain seasons, and which actually collide with the breeding season of the fishes. So these are traditional knowledge which are there, our people are using, right? So, but now the challenge is that how do we bring in all those knowledges? Are they actually, we need to question ourselves, are those traditional knowledge relevant today? This is also something, because we are so habituated with the market. Market is dictating us how to behave, what to eat, where to go, what to wear. All these things are being dictated by markets, without actually realizing. So we are in a very, very different situation now. What it was, maybe 100 years, even 100 years back. 2-3 generations back, our forefathers, their aspirations was very different than what your aspiration today. So the consumption pattern is also very different from what it was maybe 100 years back and today. So all this has a very strong linkage with the natural resources that we are extracting. And that is why the question of sustainability is much more today. It is not only about, using natural resource, but it is also about the consumption pattern. I reiterate the consumption pattern because this is the reason why we are what it is today in a situation, right? So we need to, during this 2 days workshop, I request all of you, the participants and the resource persons we have here today, we should try and find answers to a few questions I just want to mention. One is that how does indigenous wisdom practically ensure the sustainability of our environment today? Is it possible? If so, why? And if so, how? How the traditional knowledge systems can ensure sustainability, right? In today's world. Then how can we challenge the lingering colonial bias in the Western academia that still view local languages as less? I mean, this, local language is not important kind of a narrative. So we also need to address that issue. And also, can we move beyond the compartmentalization of knowledge? So compartmentalization of knowledge, I am saying that instead of choosing between indigenous knowledge or the modern science, can we have a mix of both? It should not be like that we are, following a traditional system or we are following a science-based, evidence-based systems rather. So rather, can we mix both of these and find a much more sustainable life, much more sustainable way of life? So distinguished delegates and participants, your presence here signifies a commitment to this important cause, and I believe during these 2 days we'll have very fruitful discussions. And I would also like to encourage students to ask questions, to interact. It should not be one-way traffic. Please interact, with the resource persons and try to learn more and more. I wish this discussion at Nowgong Girls College here today, over the coming days, 2 days, challenge our assumptions, broaden our horizons, and move us closer to a world where progress does not come at the cost of our heritage, right? With these words, I'd like to thank the organizer once again for having us here and giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your interesting words on how traditional practices help to preserve the environment and the Western academia's gaze upon indigenous knowledge. Now, I would like to present a brief outline of the conference. Here, we anticipate that this international conference will definitely highlight on the various indigenous practices that help in environment conservation and also prepare policy suggestions. Altogether, we have received for this conference 110 abstracts, out of which 103 has been selected after reviewing, and we have rejected 7 abstracts. And total papers received is, this has exceeded now. It has been almost 25 to 30 papers now. Those who haven't, submitted your full papers till now, we request you submit it by 20th of April. And the good papers, okay, the good papers would be published, would be shortlisted, and they would be published in a book form. And we would also take note that those a few papers are published in a peer-reviewed journal. And this is our, you have already received the kit, and this is the venues of all the, technical sessions. 2 parallel sessions would be held, technical sessions would be held parallelly. Venue 1, this is the venue, and venue 2 is IQAC office. Then there will be 5 papers for venue 1 and 6 for venue 2. Technical session 2 will start at 3 o'clock and it will last till 5 o'clock. And the venues are already given there. You can check in your conference kit. The schedule has already been provided. Then tomorrow there will be 3 technical sessions parallelly in the first in a morning half, and then in the technical session 4, 3 parallel sessions. The list of paper presenters, the number of paper presenters are already given there. This is all, I think. Thank you so much. And now, to enlighten us on this topic, we have invited Professor Charmali Nahalage. Before she delivers her keynote speech, I would like to present a brief introduction on Professor Charmali Nahalage. She is a distinguished Sri Lankan academician, primatologist, and biological anthropologist. She is a professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Jayawardhanapura. We are privileged to have amongst us Professor Charmali Nahalage, and we hope that her keynote speech would definitely enlighten us. Ma'am, please come here.
Thank you, Dr. Mridula, and good morning, everybody. Dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, conference participants and students. Before starting, I would like to thank Dr. Kulen Chandradas, Principal, Nowgong Girls College, and Dr. Mridula Kashyap for inviting me to participate in this very important international conference on environmental and indigenous knowledge systems in South Asian context. I would also like to extend my sincere thanks to the conference organizing committee, because from the moment we get off from the Guwahati airport, they have been very helpful and facilitating things for us to make it so easy. So I thank you all and wish you all the best for a very successful conference. So it is both an honor and privilege for me to address this August gathering in making this event today on a topic profound on global relevance. That's indigenous people, traditional ecological knowledge, and biodiversity conservation with a focus on South Asian perspective. At a time when ecological crises are intensifying worldwide, we are compelled to revisit knowledge systems that have sustained human-nature relations for millennia, and to re-examine whose knowledge counts in shaping our environmental future. So, let me start by giving a brief introduction of the indigenous people in the world. The indigenous people represent some of the oldest living cultures on earth, yet paradoxically remain among the most marginalized. Globally, there are approximately 476 million indigenous people spanning over 90 countries and representing nearly 5,000 cultures. These figures remind us not only of their diversity but also of their immense contribution to humanity's cultural and ecological heritage. Where there is no universal definition because it's so diverse, a shared understanding has emerged that recognizes their deep historical continuity, cultural distinguishedness, and enduring relationship with land and nature. These communities are characterized by self-identification, strong territorial attachment, distinct socio-cultural systems, and a determination to preserve their ancestral ways of life. Importantly, their identity is not merely cultural, it's ecological, embedded in landscapes that they have shaped and protected over generations. And here I show a small a map of the distribution of the world's indigenous people. There you can see in different continents the number of indigenous peoples representing, and then after this I will just go over continents where we could get a brief overview of who they are and their numbers. When it comes to Americas, in the Americas there are about 39 million of indigenous people, which are both significant and diverse, such as American Indians in North America, First Nations in Canada, and 2 Andean communities in Bolivia, demonstrating how deeply rooted these societies remain. In Europe, there are approximately 250,000 people, indigenous people, currently primarily represented by the Sami population, distributed in the northern regions of Norway, Sweden and Finland, and in some parts of Russia. Then across Africa, there are over 50 million indigenous people, like the Tuareg, Maasai, San and Batwa communities inhabit ecologically diverse regions from the Sahara to the Great Lakes, contributing traditional knowledge systems that sustain fragile ecosystems under increasingly harsh climatic conditions. And also in Oceania, approximately 7 million people belong to indigenous populations, including Australian Aborigines and the Maori population, distributed across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands. When it comes to Asia, Asia stands as the most culturally diverse region, home to nearly 370 million indigenous people. Being China has the highest number of indigenous people, estimated around 125 million individuals, followed by India with approximately 104 million, and followed by Philippines and Vietnam, and in other countries as well. This distribution highlights Asia's prominent role in global indigenous diversity. And when it comes to South Asia, within South Asia, the indigenous communities demonstrate remarkable ecological adaptation. As I told before, India has the highest population, about 104 million people, with over 700 officially recognized ethnic groups, and this is followed by Nepal, mounting to like 10 to 15 million people, and then Bangladesh. And the Vadda community in Sri Lanka, it's a very small population compared to the other indigenous populations, estimated at around 2,000 to 5,000 people. And also Pakistan and Bhutan also have a significant indigenous groups. However, it was difficult for me to find an accurate data for Afghanistan, because sometimes these indigenous groups, tribal societies, they are not so very distinguished. So it's sometimes very difficult to get the data. Overall, South Asia provides some of the most compelling examples of human-environment interactions. So after going through briefly about the indigenous populations of the world, so let's see what is these indigenous knowledge systems. I was thinking of I will just go through with the definitions and then go on like that, since there are students as well. So indigenous knowledge systems are traditional community-based knowledge developed over generations through direct interaction with the environment. In South Asia, indigenous knowledge systems reflect ecological intelligence tailored to specific landscapes, offering sustainable solutions that modern systems are often struggle to replicate. And when it comes to indigenous knowledge, also often referred to as the traditional ecological knowledge, it plays a central and increasingly recognized role in biodiversity protection and the conservation. TK is a cumulative body of knowledge developed through generations of interactions with the environment, a knowledge that is empirical, adaptive, and deeply contextual. It offers invaluable insights into natural resource management and then biodiversity conservation and sustainable livelihoods. And here I am going to show some key features of these indigenous knowledge, that is they are long term. So these they have a long-term perspective rooted in centuries of observation of seasonal cycles, species behavior, and environmental change far exceeding the temporal scope of most scientific studies. And the other important thing is the biodiversity stewardships, because many of the world's most biodiverse regions overlap with these indigenous territories. It has been observed that biodiversity tends to decline more slowly in the areas managed by these indigenous populations, and contributes to biodiversity protection, to the protection of sacred natural sites and community enforced conservation rules and practices. This approach helps maintain genetic diversity and ecosystem resilience. And then when it comes to sustainable resource management, equally important, because IK often emphasizes balance rather than extractions, such as taking only what is needed, because that is what has been happening and that is what we are not doing also, because these people always take only what is needed for them, and of course they respect plants and animals and ensure that the resources are preserved for future generations, but something that the modern day people are lacking of. Yeah. And then also this indigenous, when it comes to the phase of climatic change, the indigenous knowledge offers adaptive strategies for climate resilience agriculture to early warning systems, highlighting indigenous peoples as frontline observers of environmental change. And when it comes to ethical and cultural dimensions, their sustainability is underpinned by ethical worldviews that positions humans as part of the nature rather than separating from it. And in that way, it fosters a deep sense of stewardship and the responsibility. So that is what has been happening over the last millennia, and now that is what is slowly changing, and that's why we are having so many problems. Then let's see how this indigenous knowledge could contribute to the biodiversity conservation. Because biodiversity conservation encompasses the protection and sustainable management of all forms of life, ensuring ecological balance and resilience in the face of growing anthropogenic pressures. So, the indigenous knowledge systems contribute to biodiversity conservation through maintaining sacred landscapes like these sacred groves and protective rivers and mountains, and then practicing sustainable agriculture and agrobiodiversity. Many of the speakers earlier have been talking, giving examples for these things, and then implementing community-based wildlife protection, and then managing traditional water management systems, and then enforcing prior customary laws regulating resource use. So by this way only these people have been helping to conserve the biodiversity as well. So now let's explore with this context with some of the examples from the South Asian context. But I have to say there are so many examples from so many countries in the South Asia, but due to the time's constraints, I will just tell few of the examples. For example, when it comes to maintaining sacred landscapes like sacred groves, protected rivers and mountains, so long before the term protected area comes in policies, indigenous communities establish sacred landscapes protected through their belief systems, not by force, but they are doing it by understanding and demonstrating conservation through culture, because this conservation is deeply embedded in all the cultures of these indigenous people. So that's why it has been up to we have been able to conserve it even up to now. And then in India, so when I talk about these sacred groves are the forest patches protected due to many religious beliefs. And then in India there are many such sacred groves compared to the other South Asian countries. And then it goes back to these Vedic times also, because the forests were, during that time, the forests were classified according to their uses, the Tapovana for meditation, and then Pashuvana for conserving deer and other animals, and then Hastivana for conserving elephants. So likewise, that indicate that the use restriction was imposed with an important focus on wildlife conservation. So from very early time back. And then in the so these are some examples, like the sacred groves of India, such as those maintained by the Khasi community in the Meghalaya, serves as a biodiversity hotspot, preserve rare species, and sustaining local ecosystems through strict cultural prohibition. So just one thing in India, and then in Bhutan also. In Bhutan also there are like areas surrounding Buddhist temples and stupas are considered as sacred, prohibiting hunting and killing of wild animals and felling of trees. Thereby they are just kind of making small mini refugees. So that also like have a very important aspect of biodiversity conservation. And similarly in Sri Lanka, these forest reserves and temple forests associated with monasteries and hermitages protected and tended by Buddhist monks, and also in Nepal's like these sacred fields known as Shastras like reflect long-standing tradition of conservation embedded in religious and cultural practices. And then not even that, like in all the other countries, like like across Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and there are sacred groves continue to function as ecological sanctuaries, illustrating the widespread presence of culturally driven conservation systems. And also the rivers like Ganga and the Mount Kailash are also regarded as sacred, which helps support and sustain biodiversity conservation in these regions. And when it comes to like maintaining traditional water management systems, so these traditional water management systems are mainly they are to collect and like store water in arid zones, so ensuring its availability for agriculture and wildlife. For example, the tank cascade system in Sri Lanka, which is a very famous dry zone water management system that has been practicing from the very long time, for millennia. And then like these systems include interconnected tanks, can't see, like from the top, like so there are many interconnected tanks and canals and feeders designed to collect, store and distribute rainwater for irrigation, and then for household use and for the use of animals. So in all these ways, even in the dry zone and even in the drought periods, there are always enough water to sustain life and to maintain the biodiversity. But now sadly in Sri Lanka, most of these tank cascade systems are not functioning properly because they have not been maintaining properly. So that's why we have this some kind of drought periods and then floods, because the water, the surface water is not managing properly nowadays. But earlier it was like a very successful system. And now the country is of course trying to clean all these tank cascading systems. There seems to be thousands of them around the dry and arid zones in the country. And not only Sri Lanka, like this, the Sobo rainwater harvesting system in Nagaland demonstrates how mountain communities store runoff water for dry zone cultivation. And then also this Johads and Baolis, like in Rajasthan, in the arid regions in Rajasthan and Deccan Plateau, they also focus on water as the driver of biodiversity. And in not even there, like in the Kharesh system, I think many of you all must have been familiar with. It's an ancient groundwater collecting system that draws water from an aquifers from the mountain areas. And this is these underground channels, as you can see there, are an ancient canal system, prevents water evaporation and also like it helps for the farmers to use underground water for their farming and let the wildlife and the other like plants and the wildlife to use the surface water. So these people are only using the underground water. So that is also a way of conserving the biodiversity in these arid areas. And then when practicing the sustainable agriculture and agrobiodiversity, one of the speakers earlier also mentioned about this indigenous agricultural system from the Appetani rice cultivation, where they cultivate rice and fish farming in valleys, and there they use zero pesticides, and then these bamboo based water management systems. So these are very environmental friendly, and also it maintains soil fertility and aquatic biodiversity. And this some of this has been practicing in Sri Lanka also to some extent. And then this shifting cultivation, that is like cultivating like chena, we call in Sri Lanka it is at chena, and slash and burn or Sweden. It was like identified in different countries in many names, and practiced in Northeast India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and in many parts of Nepal also. There the land is cultivated temporarily with mixed crops for like a short period of time, then let it be there, and then they start in a new place, and then this mixed cropping reduce pests and also enable forest regrowth during follow period. So that's also a way of regenerating the forest and try to maintain and conserve the biodiversity. And not only that, like not only on the land, there are many like indigenous knowledge related to marine fishery as well, because marine indigenous knowledge particularly among the Sri Lankan beach seine fishing communities and India's Rampani, and then the Bangladesh Hilsa fishery reveals sophisticating understanding of ocean dynamics and species behavior, enabling sustainable harvesting. So revitalizing these systems is essential for food security, climate resilience, biodiversity protection, and then coastal community survival. And there are some practices to ensure community-based wildlife protection, like the community-based conservation as seen in the Bishnoi community in India, which illustrates extraordinary commitment on protecting biodiversity even at the cost of human lives. Also, similarly, the Chipko movement in Uttarakhand, it's so like women take the lead in protecting forest trees driven by indigenous knowledge that views forest not as source of timber but as vital life support system. So this Sundarlal Bahuguna, I think all of you all must have heard about him. So when the timber companies were trying to cut off the trees in their forests, they came and they hugged the trees and then tried to protect. So, and after that time, like the government banned cutting these trees. So that is why, so these are all their land and they are trying to protect it by this, not only the trees but also the animals that's depending on this forest. And also, like there's this enforcing customary laws regulating resource use also. Many countries like Nepal, they practice these community forest pioneers, and then Afghanistan, the nomadic groups, they follow traditional migration routes, so then that prevents overgrazing of certain places, so the rotation is really good for the protection of the biodiversity. And then comes the high altitude resilience, for like my thing in Pakistan also, Kalash people, they also use this celestial observation to manage gazing and irrigation cycles, which has been recognized by the UNESCO as well, and then especially the Thaga system. So it's like a traditional river-based community fishing. It's been practicing in parts of Northeast India and Nepal also. So what they do is they practice seasonal fishing bans and community enforcement and rotational harvesting. So in that way, what they are doing is, like, because of the seasonal fish bans, it allows the fish stocks to regenerate again, and also it maintains the river biodiversity. So these are the some kinds of customary laws regulating the resource use. And then, what are these lessons for us for the future? Okay, what do these examples teach us? So, it teaches us that indigenous knowledge systems are not primitive. They are empirical and adaptive and tested across generations up to now. And also, this conservation, like whatever the conservation efforts we are using, succeeds when communities are custodians, not excluded stakeholders, because that is what I think most of you all know. Like now there are the new discipline called research discipline called intradisciplinary research. Like that's what we are doing now in the world. So there what we do is, when we do research, like especially for these wicked problems that we have with the sustainable development, like poverty, hunger and all these things, and preserving indigenous knowledge and then cultural heritage, for that we are not researching on the community, we are researching with the community. So that is what interdisciplinary means. So there we are trying to take the community also as a stakeholder. Then only the knowledge will be sustained. So that's why I also invite you, when you do your research now, try not to research on these indigenous communities, but try to work with them. Then only you will be able to sustain and preserve these communities and their knowledge systems. That is what the world trend is. That's what we are also practicing, and but we should practice, I think. Yeah. And then the other thing is, the biodiversity protection is strongest when it is embedded in culture, spirituality and everyday practice. So that's what these people have been doing. Now with this globalization and all this modern technology and all, these kind of things have been slowly moving away from our cultures. So that's why, like as these earlier speakers are telling, that's why we are facing all these problems. So I think now it's time for us to embed this into our culture, because spirituality, like the other speaker told us, myth. They are not myths, but these myths are there to preserve the beliefs, and in addition, in one way, indirectly preserving the environment. So that's why if you really analyze these kind of myths that you have about the environment and animals, you can really see that they are not just not to be laughed as or disregarded as myths, but to take its the true meaning and to practice it. Okay. And then why does it matters? So as biodiversity loss accelerates, integrating traditional ecological knowledge with scientific knowledge is no longer optional, because it's imperative. Indigenous communities are not conserving biodiversity, they are safeguarding humanity's ecological memory. Therefore, we have to integrate this indigenous knowledge in modern context by improves conservation outcomes, then strengthens ecosystem resilience, then support cultural diversity, and promote equitable governance. Because today's leading conservation frameworks emphasize knowledge co-production. That means bringing together indigenous knowledge systems and Western science as complementary, not competing approaches. So we have to go side by side, because earlier the Western knowledge disregard indigenous knowledge, but nowadays, like, people have understand, the special UN bodies also have understand that you can't disregard indigenous knowledge. So this now the new thing is the knowledge co-production, that all this indigenous knowledge and modern scientific findings has to go side by side. So that is what we call as knowledge co-production. And then for moving forward, and when it comes to moving forward, the indigenous people and their knowledge systems offer invaluable insights for biodiversity conservation. So as we move forward, it is essential to recognize, respect, and integrate this knowledge into global conservation methods. So as policymakers, researchers, and environmental leaders, our responsibility is clear. That is, we should recognize indigenous communities as knowledge holders, not to marginalize them, and then also to protect their rights. And then of course integrate traditional ecological knowledge with scientific research, and that's what I think most people are trying to do in the sense of this knowledge co-management, and then ensure benefit sharing and ethical collaboration. Because the future of biodiversity conservation in South Asia will not be secured by technology alone. It will be secured through partnership between science and tradition, policy and practice, and then modern institutions and ancient wisdom. So in closing, I would like to say indigenous communities are not merely protecting biodiversity. They are protecting humanity's ecological memory. In listening to them, we may rediscover how to live not above the nature, but within it, with the nature. So that's, I think that is my final message to you as well. And thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your highly enriching lecture and making us familiar with different indigenous tribes, indigenous population from across the globe, and also how indigenous population, they have been natural custodians of the land, and discussing on the concepts of sacred groves, protected rivers, and also a new concept like tank cascade system, which is prevalent in Sri Lanka. Thank you so much, ma'am. There is a slight change in our schedule. Instead of the high tea now, we thought that we would be continuing with the inaugural lecture session. So now I would request Dr. Deepak Gyawali sir to deliver his plenary lecture. Before I request him to deliver the plenary lecture, let me give a brief introduction on sir. He is an academician in the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology and a guest senior research scholar with the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, IIASA, Austria. He was a founding member of the non-profit Nepal Water Conservation Foundation, established 3 decades ago, a hydroelectric power engineer of Moscow Energy Institute, and a political economist. Gyawali sir served as Nepal's Minister of Water Resources in 2022 to 2023. Thank you so much. Now I request sir to deliver his lecture.
Thank you, Mridula, very much. And greetings to everyone, or as we say in Nepali, Jai Hos. May you be victorious in whatever you endeavor. What I'm going to do is talk about the crisis that we are facing, try to go back to try to understand what is the nature of that crisis. Okay? And in doing that, I'd first like to talk about locating this indigeneity. It has already been done brilliantly by Charmali and others, speakers before us. The problem here is, it is posited against modernity, it's Western, Eurocentric. Now these are what are considered the other side of indigeneity, okay? And they're seen as was said before, unscientific. As a scientist, what I find laughable about it is that science is about empirical verification. You observe and verify, okay? Now, much of the indigenous knowledge is actually about 1,000, 2,000-year-old empirical verification, generation to generation, okay? Maybe not written down, maybe not recorded, but in folklores, in songs, in practices, it's there, and it's all observed empirical evidence, okay? Which we have been disregarding in our quest for so-called modernity, okay? Much to the damage to our own societies and our own environment. A lot of problems have to do with the language itself. Modernity or development, for instance. Let me quote my daughter's PhD thesis. When a guy starts quoting his daughter's PhD thesis, he's really old, okay? Bandana, she did a thesis on, the sociology of development. And in Nepali, the word development has had very interesting migration over the years. During the very early Rana period, it was called Sabhyata. And then the Pandits and all started getting mad, saying, what, we are asabhya, we are not civilized, So they changed that word to Unnati, as the other word. It's also there in Hindi, I believe, And that was unsatisfactory. Then they changed it later to Pragati, and then ultimately to Vikas as development. And now our interesting Prime Minister, Mr. Oli, has tried to change that to something called Samriddhi or prosperity. Okay. So you see that migration, which still does not really explain, what development is. Whether you call it Vikas or Samriddhi or Pragati or whatever. Okay. Now, we have had similar problems with the words climate change, which I will talk about. Initially, it was Mausam Parivartan. Okay. And then it was pointed out by my good friend, Pakistani climate scholar, Said Ayub Qutub, that the word Mausam comes from Arabic and Persian, and really refers to some kind of this sea wind pattern that the sailors, Arab sailors, used to go all the way to Malacca and Southeast Asia. Okay? The trouble with that word as it migrated over here to Nepal was that it refers to three things at once. Weather, climate, and season. Now, what are you talking about when you say climate change is Mausam Parivartan? So you go and talk to a taxi driver or a shopkeeper, which we did in our surveys, and it was like, oh, it was very hot yesterday, or it's too cold tomorrow, it will be very cold tomorrow. So it's not climate change. It has nothing to do with CO2 or greenhouse gases. Yeah. That really has not migrated down to our everyday use. Just the other day, just 2 days before, I was at a conference on the World Water Day, where I had to again give another keynote. And the problem there was nobody still has found a proper Nepali translation, and I'm sure it's the same in Hindi and other languages, for transboundary water. Because what is transboundary? Well, international boundary one can understand. Administrative boundaries one can understand. But the problem in water is not just physical nation state or administrative boundaries. It's also disciplinary boundaries. Economists don't talk to engineers, and engineers don't talk to lawyers, and lawyers don't talk to sociologists. There's a disciplinary boundary there. There's a big problem there. There's a sectoral boundary. One of my big problems as Minister of Water Resources and Energy, because I was handling both, it was one, was that I quickly discovered that the Agriculture Department never really formally talked to the Irrigation Department. The Irrigation Department was doing its own stuff, building, canals and dams, and Agriculture Department was doing its own stuff, and the two never talked. And when you look at the irrigation projects that we have, it's the same in Bihar. I mean, I know that very well, having walked up and down the Kosi, all over Bihar, with activists like D.K. Mishra. It's the same story. The engineering, the irrigation department is populated by a lot of civil engineers. In fact, there's a hegemony of civil engineering there, whose only thought is really building dams and embankments and everything else. What happens to water after that is not their concern. The agriculture people don't even talk to the engineers. There's nothing to do with it. So this is where we have a real problem with development and with the very concept of development. So we are right now going into a bit of activism, which is what I'll also ask you to do, by, when you criticize a bad project done by the government or the private sector or whatever, immediately, and I know this is true in India too, it's very true in Nepal, you are labeled as anti-developmentalist, Vikas Birodhi, and nobody talks to you, it's finished. You're beyond the pale. So what we now do is we talk about good development versus bad development. We're not against good development, we're against bad development. So is it Subikas we are talking about or Kubikas? And once you get into that debate, you open up the space for public discourse. And this is what the next stage of activism really must be into, No, don't allow yourself to be painted with one brush right away saying, oh, these are Vikas Birodhi, anti-developmentalists. No. We are for good development, But what you are proposing is horrible. And you have to prove that it's not horrible, okay? So this is where things start getting interesting if you go into that kind of a breakdown of a discourse, okay? Now, a word of caution is necessary here. As environmentalists and activists, when we talk of indigenous knowledge, we are not trying to, and criticizing modernity and modern and Eurocentric and everything else, we are not closing our windows. I'd like to remind you of Mahatma Gandhi's famous saying that I will open the windows of my house for fresh wind to blow through, but I will not allow any wind to blow me off my feet. It's a remarkable statement, something that we should hold on to as we begin this activism to bring about sanity to our society. Now, we are faced with two major epoch-changing events. The word used by my astrologer, we have to go to the astrologer to figure out when the birthday is, because by the lunar calendar, you don't even know when it falls, and you have to do puja and all that. And he used this expression to me quite some time back. He said, the stars are in such a way, sir, that we are going to have yugantakari parivartan. He said this quite some time back, 6-7 years back. I said, what? Well, 2.5 years of Saturn here and 2.5 years. Well, whether you believe in astrology or not is besides the point. The point is it is cultural and we better know, think about it. And his first prediction to me came immediately after with COVID. And then the next 2.5 years, he said the same thing. And it came with Gaza and Ukraine and everything else. The other day, he was, 2 weeks back, he was really scared and he was talking to me saying this lunar eclipse that's going to happen, which happened on, I think, just few days back, it's going to be terrible. Well, just a day or two before that was Iran, So, well, you don't have to believe in astrology, but there it is, So, there are severe epoch-changing, yugantakari parivartan changes going around. I am focusing on two. One is climate change, been talked about, but I'll say a few more things about it. And the second is, and in a few words I'll brush it aside, I won't talk too much about it because it's an everyday thing, what I call Trump Tandav, okay? So let me just say, talk about Trump Tandav. In essence, what it is, there are a couple of things. First, it's moving away from globalization. And it's globalization 2 that we are moving away from, not 1. let me remind you that globalization 1 ended in 1914 with the start of the First World War. That was the first wave of globalization. Okay? And we saw 2 world wars, we saw all kinds of things. Before, in 1944, globalization 2 started with the Bretton Woods arrangement that created the IMF, the World Bank, and the whole sort of thing that we have. Now, globalization 2 is not being ended by Trump. He's only the last, rather very colorful figure in the drama. It started ending in 1971 with Richard Nixon, when the framing of Bretton Woods, the core base was the supremacy of the US dollar, which was pegged at $35 to 1 ounce of gold. In 1971, because Richard Nixon was fighting the Vietnam War, and wars are bloody expensive, he took the dollar away from the gold standard and allowed it to float. You know, I don't know how much of you remember, but when I was even younger than you, my father was the Attorney General at that time, had to go for an international conference, and I accompanied him, I remember, to the bank, you know, way back in the 60s. Huh? And that time it was, I think, 8 Nepali rupees to $1. Today it is 150. So what has happened essentially with Nixon's work, and it went further with Bill Clinton and Obama and others, and now with Trump, is that US is the only, it was a reserve currency for the world and a trading currency. Okay? So what US had the right to print dollars. Now if you print too much currency, there is inflation. But the cleverness of the US system was they printed dollars, converted it into US Treasury bonds, you know, and sold it to the jokers like us all around the world, including China, India, Japan, everyone. So they were able to export their inflation abroad. This is the critical thing. And this is what is ending now with the de-dollarization, the BRICS and everything else. So in a sense, we have got to thank Mr. Trump for it, you know, that we are getting out of this, you know, what you might call the enslavement, economic enslavement that's inherent in it, okay. The other factor that we have to talk about when we talk about Mr. Trump, you know, and this, think about it, okay, because I'm here basically to try to provoke you to think. You know? The supremacy of the US in military and economic terms was, since the end of the Second World War, unchallenged, okay. But what was that based on? It was the control of the financial system and a massive military. But what people forgot was that US is not a land power. It's a maritime power. And it can traverse the world and come and shoot missiles in God knows anywhere, but they can't hold land. Look at Vietnam. After all that, they had to leave. Look at Afghanistan. 20 years, trillions of dollars spent, you know, fighting the Taliban, and ultimately handing over power to the Taliban. What the bloody hell did you do? What was the purpose? You know, the same thing you are seeing in Libya. Now, Iran is a very, very different kettle of fish. And suddenly now, even Mr. Trump is beginning to realize that's not just enough to bomb. Because the aircraft carriers, you know, it turns out are sitting ducks. They are vulnerable to these super hypersonic missiles. And so he's had to take all his aircraft carriers out of area. And the planes that fly from them need to be refueled, you know, midway, and are very vulnerable to drone attacks. They've been hit and sunk, you know. So what I'm going to close here is that Mr. Trump, the age of Trump Tandav, you know, is forcing a complete restructuring of global economy. And if we and our leaders are not sensitive, wise enough, you know, we will be, you know, crushed like, you know, we have a Nepali expression, ghun pisieko, you know, when you use the thing to grind corn. You know, these small things also get ground up, you know, very nice protein. Okay, so that's what we will end up being unless we really, you know, look at this deglobalization. So what is deglobalization now forcing us to do? It is the subject matter of this conference, localization. Now we are forced to localize. Now by localization, I don't mean that tomorrow we are going to start manufacturing iPhones and, you know, all these fancy things. No, no. We're talking about societies being self-sufficient in basic needs. Basic food, basic shelter, basic clothing. Okay. Now, in this localization is what we really have the essence of that indigeneity coming to the fore. You know, because much of indigenous knowledge is actually has emerged out of the hydro-ecological reality of the place. A desert ecology is very different from the, very delta ecology of, let's say, the Sundarbans, okay, and so on. In Nepal, we are very, I've been advocating this, I've not succeeded, is setting up transect, because the point closest to you here from Nepal is this Kalbalgudi, Kanchanapur, or whatever they call it, an eastern bottom end of Nepal, which is 60 meters above sea level and 16 kilometers away from Bangladesh, just 60 meters. Go from there 150 kilometers northwest, and you end up on the top of Mount Everest at 9,000 meters, 8,848, okay, meters. So within 150 kilometers, we go from tropical, subtropical climate all the way to Arctic conditions with everything in between. Which means people who live along the thing go from being tropical people to steppe people to alpine people to just about everything. And it's the same story here also along the Indian Himalaya. Okay. Now, what is climate change doing to this? This is where I really want to talk about. Okay? Climate change is talked about everywhere. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump has now moved away and he's thrown Paris Agreement away. Yeah? But, don't blame Trump only. Our own governments have not done a good job. And not only that, my basic point is that COP27, which happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, we have gone through COP30 now, okay? COP27, for the first time in my 20 years of doing climate advocacy, COP27 finally admitted that climate problem is a water problem. It was created by the energy sector, but the impact to society is not going to be so much through the energy sector as through the water sector. Too much water, too little water, water at the wrong place, wrong time, you name it. The 2022 flood in Pakistan is a classic example. An arm of the monsoon that should have petered out by Himachal Pradesh or Kashmir or wherever, because the atmosphere has now so much energy, it's a boiling kettle, it's no longer a simmering kettle, okay? The arm of the monsoon wildly swung like a boiling kettle and went to that part of Pakistan where it should never have and dumped in about 8 hours 7 years of rain in one go. Shouldn't have happened, but it did, okay? I mean, there is that problem with climate change. So we did a study, and this is just to point to you that when I was the chair of Climate Action Network South Asia, co-chair, we did something that I had insisted and only Nepal could do it. In India, too many NGOs were fighting and they never managed to do anything. Pakistan tried and it didn't go anywhere, okay? But what we did was, it was a purely civil society assessment of state of climate action in Nepal, okay? And not 1 cent was taken from any donor. It was a total voluntary activity. You can download it. In fact, this PDF you can circulate you can do a PDF and circulate if anybody who wants it, and you can check it. What we found was, in summary, Nepal's climate policies are absolutely wonderful. You can give Nepal Nobel Prize in climate policy tomorrow and no questions will be asked. The policy is so good. But if you look at the actual climate action, we are heading towards fossil fuel addiction like nobody's business. So what is the point? If you make these fancy policies for I don't know what, seminars or God knows what, but in practice we are heading the wrong way. So this was what this particular report tried to highlight. Another report that we did, looking first time in Nepal, I don't know how much of that you do in India, I'm told not much. In Nepal, not at all. That's why I'm mentioning this. Scarcity is never studied. It is talked about, newspapers write about it, but scientifically nobody has really properly studied scarcity, water scarcity. We did it, identified different types of scarcities, hydrological scarcity, agricultural scarcity, meteorological scarcity. These are very, very different types of water scarcities, by the way, okay? And the most interesting we found out, which is probably applicable to your area here also, okay, is what we call verticality generated scarcity. It's only in the mountains. You know, villages in mountains are dependent on spring sources. And when spring sources dry up for a variety of reasons, not so much climate change as bad technology use, you know, over pumping and all that, you know, then what happens is you can't survive up there in that village. In Uttarakhand, I've seen tunneling by hydropower plants, and India's environmental guideline only says you look at, you know, 50 meters or so of the, you know, the tunnel pathway, you know. The trouble is the underground aquifer is something completely different, you know. And so what has happened is, you know, as the tunnel boring started for the hydropower, springs dried up. Because underground water started flowing in different ways, you know. The poor village now, it takes them 3 hours to carry water. Before it was only, let's say, 15 or 20-minute job. So you can't live there anymore. So this is the kind of, you know, tragedy that's going on, not studied. Now, I talk about 7 colors of water, you know. And this is important when you talk climate change, because how is climate change affecting water? 7 colors: white water, atmospheric water. Okay, we talked about that Pakistan stuff. In India, it happens all the time, cyclones, etc. Green water is soil moisture. Now, why I'm mentioning this is green moisture, soil moisture, green water, all our wild forests, all our wildlife, you know, and all our so-called dryland agriculture is dependent. You know, forests are not irrigated. Dryland agriculture, maize growing is not irrigated. They're all dependent on soil moisture, okay? Absolutely no studies, nothing whatsoever. And to think that, you know, this is so ubiquitous, affects all of us. You know, if tomorrow, through climate change, temperature rise and there's quicker desiccation, the drying of soil, we're going to get, forest fires is one example of this green moisture loss, okay? So, no, not studied. Blue, of course, there's too much talk about blue water. The river waters, Ganga, Brahmaputra, fight with Bangladesh, Indus Water Treaty gone out of the window now, and so on and so forth, okay? Mahakali Treaty in Nepal, India, it's a disaster, okay? We know about that. Unfortunately, it's hegemonic. Rivers are there to see, Brahmaputra is here to see, Ganga is there to see. People talk about it, and there's a big fight, and nothing happens about it in the end. But again, another not talked about water is brown water, which is groundwater, okay? It's the biggest source of all our urban water supply now, and it's rapidly depleting because of a misuse of technology, okay? And then we have grey water and black water, which is basically used water. Industrial water is highly polluted black water. Domestic urban water is grey, which is organic, which is easy to recycle, unlike industrial. And finally, magenta water. That's the ocean water. That's from where, from every square meter of ocean, on an average, 1 liter of moisture evaporates. And that's what finds its way to the land. You know, that's our source. No study, no understanding. We talk about icebergs and glaciers melting, but then what is happening to the magenta water? 2 kinds of problems. Cities like Madras, Calcutta, Bombay will be underwater with climate change. As the temperature rises, the ocean expands, and you know the sea level rises. The other is this massive kind of tornadoes and cyclones and etc. that will come around. Again, it's necessary to keep this holistic picture about what climate change is doing to each color of water. And on each color of water, a very, very different type of society is dependent. Very different. The desert societies depend on one type of water. You know, the Sundarbans kind of folk societies depend on a different type of water and different type of food that comes from that water, you know, and so on. We are very far from trying to even understand this. This is a cartoon done by one of our friends when we were doing the research between Madras, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Nepal on groundwater overdraft. This is a social response to groundwater overdraft. It's happening because now this new technology called pumping technology is just massively pumping away everything. There is practically no regulation, you know, and it's free for all. In Nepal, in some places, it's so bad, they say these Chinese contractors working around trying to make extra money, they keep knocking at your door and saying, sir, you want drilling? Well, drilling, you know, very cheap, I do. So it's a free for all. The result is what you see in this diagram. Now, if you are a rich farmer, you know, you pay for the well, you grow strawberries, make a lot of money, you know, you don't care. Your neighbors' wells are all going down. At the other extreme, you see the village patwari hierarchy type, you know, official. rules and regulations are necessary. I believe India has been trying to make a groundwater law and hasn't succeeded so far, right? We are very far from it. It's not possible. There are what, 50, 60 million pumps all over India. How are you going to regulate each one in each one's house, backyard? It's a big problem. It has to be done by some very different method. Then at the bottom right, you have this angry environmentalist, you know. He thinks governments are stupid, you know, neighbor is greedy, the market guys and all. So he's an abhiyankari. That's his job. His job is to critique, you know. And that's what the environmentalists do. Unfortunately, I should mention that high point of environmentalism in both India and Nepal and South Asia and globally, I might say, was the 80s and 90s. When we had the Anil Agrawals, my good friend, you know, and all, you know. 21st century has been a disaster. There's been a lot of descriptive kind of work, but there's been really very little activism. Which is why, you know, I, again, would like to thank Mr. Trump. Because of him, I think there is going to be activism now, finally. You know, people are going to wake up from their slumber, procedural slumber, I call it, and get into activism. And do that before it is too late. That's the basic point. Now, in Nepal, groundwater is not just a terai flat plain thing. Even here, every mountain is a water tower. It's not only mountains that have snow on top of them. Water is inside the mountain. This is done by my good friend Madhukar Upadhyay. And we continued that work. And we found out that in springs are essentially leakages of this water tower. That's what springs are. Okay. In reviving springs, and we've been doing a lot of work in trying to revive springs, we found out that these old ponds that existed for generations before, but which have now gone into disrepair and disuse, you know, is if you just rebuild them, as you see, you know, village got together, we told them, oh, drinking water pipe, sir, you don't need this now. I said, no, wait a minute, you need this, you know. Your spring is going dry, you need water for your buffaloes and things like that. So they all worked to revive this pond, as you can see. We did it across Nepal in many places, and suddenly guess what happened? Suddenly springs that were drying revived themselves. Why? Because the rain that was collected there started slowly seeping into the groundwater tower, and the springs revived. So this has to be done on a massive scale. Except for the government of Sikkim, I don't know any other government in the region that's even thinking properly about it. Bhutan has begun, I have understood. In Nepal, nothing. You know, we've been shouting for 15 years, but just not getting through at all. Now that you got Mr. Balan, who's a 36-year-old engineer, maybe we can convince him to start looking at springs. But I don't hold my hopes too high. This is another classic, amazing, unconventional scientific study that discovered this. My colleague Madhukar Upadhyay, they were watershed experts, you know. They had budget left at the end of the budget cycle, and you know what happens when there's budget left, it lapses and goes into the government treasury. So these guys thought, you know, why let budget lapse, you know? There's some money. Now there are these village women up there looking for jobs. We saw that there are some ponds, old ponds on ridge tops that is overgrown and dilapidated. Why don't we give these women some money for khaja, you know, afternoon meal, and clean up the ponds? Now, they had been working as watershed experts in trying to stabilize landslides. The trouble is this check dam technology, you build a check dam to stabilize things, the landslides just moves to another area. It just shifts the head, as they say. So they were really worried about that. And what happened was once these ponds on top of the ridge were built, an active gully stabilized, as you can see in the two pictures. Now, the physics behind it is very simple, the hydrology. The scouring potential of water is Q to the power of 4. 2 liters per second means 2 to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 16. If the water flow increases from 2 liters per second to 3 liters per second, it's 339, 93, 27, 27, 381. So 16 to 81, you see the scouring potential of water increase. Building ponds meant that you lop off the peak. By lopping off the peak, you reduce the scouring potential by orders of magnitude, and that is living proof of what happened in South Lalitpur in the Bagmati watershed here, as you can see here, just by building these kind of small ponds that you see on the right side. Now, on climate change, I'm going to go very fast. It's the big environmental battle in the years ahead is going to be something completely new now. It's going to be what is called water and energy footprints. When you talk localization, what you've got to now do is talk about local products that have low water and energy footprints. Now, you know that maize and millet and these things have low water footprint. You know, okay, that's one side. But let me give you a story. Many years ago, I was doing some other work. I was in Gorkha, the town in mid-Nepal, from where the term Gorkha comes, okay? So I was in Gorkha, and I was stunned to discover that a Gorkha farmer, half an hour walking from the main bazaar, who grew wonderful mountain potatoes, very tasty, okay? He could not sell it. He carried his potatoes on his doko and came to the bazaar to sell. He could not sell his potatoes in Gorkha Bazaar. Why? Because potatoes coming from Punjab, burning 2,000 kilometers of diesel, he could not compete with it. We talked about market and other things here. Markets are designed around efficiency and people making money. It's not talking about the other values that keep society afloat. So isn't it a perversity that a Gorkha farmer, half an hour from Gorkha Bazaar, growing organic potatoes and using only muscle power for transport, cannot sell his potatoes, to potatoes coming from Punjab that has burned 2,000 kilometers of diesel, which is not accounted for, which is, thrown out into the environment and not accounted for, and leading to climate change. So localization basically means that you have to go now to try to figure out, local chicken, for instance, is, consumes only half, the amount of water, one-third of the amount of water that what we call this industrial broiler chicken consumes. You can see in these figures, So paper, steel, aluminum, just look at how much water is needed to produce them. So think about, an economy where, we are importing all these things. Means essentially we are importing water from somewhere, or if we are exporting these things, we are exporting our water too. So these footprint calculations will come. The same with that was with these products. Beef is the highest water footprint stuff. Potatoes and bananas have very low water footprint, as you can see. Now this makes a case for vegetarianism because if you eat fruits and nuts, which is what yogis did, I suppose, in the forest or something, you have much lower sort of footprint, of carbon emission. Now, these are issues that are going to come back, especially with the question of transport. And don't forget, much of globalization, I talked about the military power of the US or the British Navy that conquered the world, okay, is because they transported over oceans and they commanded the naval presence. What that meant was it's the cheapest form of transport, riverine transport. And that's why Brahmaputra and other Ganga, there's talk of, Modi ji, I believe, talked about 115 rivers, 111 rivers being revived for transport. Now, as an environmentalist, I'm much in favor, although my good friends in the environment, they say, oh, but the dredging and all that. So, wait a minute, there's some price to pay for everything, But if a river, Ganga, is navigable, first of all, you have to assure that there is water in that river and not just sewer. Ganga in the Yamuna, it's just sewer. Bagmati in Kathmandu is nothing but a sewer right now. Okay? If you want rivers to be navigable, even by canoes or by big, container ships, you have to have water. To me, as an environmentalist, that's the biggest environmental benefit we can have, which means we must have an alliance between business interests that want cheap transport, and riverine transport is about 1,000 times cheaper than truck transport, by the way, on energy terms. Okay? So, to me as an environmentalist, that's really exactly what we should be doing, okay? So we have to go into these kind of footprints to understand that. Now, I'm coming to a close, but what I'm trying to talk about here is this traditional technology of irrigation. In Nepal, we have these, and you must be having here also the center, brushwood dams. Right now, we grow what's called chaite dhan, there's the rice of Chait, The rivers are very low right now. They're diverted by these bamboo and, brushwood, And, it grows a second crop of rice now. The monsoon rice is another one, okay? But this is the Chaite dhan, okay? Comes the monsoon, this gets washed away. Think of it. World's organically disposable dam. As environmentalists, we should be championing this, but no, what happens? Our governments champion that stuff on the top, It's a concrete dam on the same river, further down below, built by, I should say this here, I don't say this around the world when I give this lecture, built by the government of India in Nepal, in 19 61 or 62, I forget, when they built the Prithvi highway from Butwal to Pokhara. So the local landlords were having tough time with, people not coming to work for these brushwood dams. This is a big problem and all that. So they built that. What happened was the dam was built. It is called the this barrage. The name escapes you right now. But that barrage was built in 1962. I think 1963 or 64 there was a big flood on the Tinau River, and the Tinau River moved west, and the barrage was left high and dry hanging. This barrage is propagated by our hydrocrats as the cement dam, permanent dam, not these brushwood dams that are temporary. So what was the point? Here was this dam stood there 30 years as a tribute to man's stupidity with modernity. Okay? It destroyed the community down below because they were dependent on this kind of brushwood dams. Now that you built the permanent dam, everything collapsed and all. The area became a duckweed infested area because people had to survive. Their agriculture was gone, their traditional irrigation system was gone. Eventually it got revived by this famous Kirloskar pump that you see there. Of course, it's only for people who can afford Kirloskar pumps. If you can't afford it, it is rented out at 50 rupees an hour or something like that, whatever that rate is, on a bullock cart. It comes to you on a bullock cart. If you have got a sort of a small drilling on shallow wells, you can get it, okay. So now what I'm driving with you is the social sciences that I do. It's called cultural theory or Neo-Durkheimian theory of plural rationalities, credited to Professor Mary Douglas and Michael Thompson and others. I've worked with them a long time. And we use cultural theory to pluralize our policy terrain, policy table. It's not just governments are not only responsible for policy. Policy is the formula for the use of power. Markets have power. Don't tell me Bill Gates and Elon Musk and others don't have power, or Coca-Cola doesn't have power. They have tremendous power, as we know. They buy American politicians. $100 million was given by one businesswoman to Mr. Trump, from a Jewish lobby. We know all that. You can Google and find out, okay? Markets have power. But then so do egalitarian activists. Because egalitarian activists uphold what is called moral power. Bazaar's power, moral power versus legal procedural power of governments. So what cultural theory argues is that we need a balance of all these three forces, and all forces should be at the table, for policy making. Everyone should be heard and responded to. It's not enough just to be heard. So this is what we say. And I would sort of conclude by saying that, we talked about integrated water management. I think I heard this in the morning also. And some of us have worked on that. But we are opponents of IWRM. And let me explain why. Integrated water resource management, IWRM, is so nice. It sounds very good. It's like motherhood and apple pie. You can't be against it. Right? But the problem is it fails when you ask two basic questions. Who does the integrating and how? And it implies agency. And eventually what happens is this all goes back to the government irrigation department, which is very happy building dams with concrete and giving out theka patta, and that's it. Okay. So this picture was taken by my colleague in the Gujarat-Rajasthan border. What you see is not a truck. It's an irrigation pump. And the story behind it is about actually nexus thinking. We go beyond integrated water management to what we call nexus, water, energy, food nexus. And here what you have is the NABARD or whatever bank you have for agriculture development. They give loans to farmers for, I think, something like 3 kilowatt pumps. Okay? The trouble is farmers take, pawn their wives' jewelry to buy 10 kilowatt pumps. Now, engineers and economists at NABARD say farmers are stupid. 3 kilowatt pump to ho jayega na, why take 10, No, it's the engineers and economists who are stupid. Because the farmer knows that a pump, 3 kilowatt pump, will pump water for 2,000 hours out of 8,000 in a year, and then lies in a go down to rust. 10 kilowatt pump can pump water and can be fitted on 4 wheels and becomes a truck and earns you money along the way. Okay. So here is integrated, or better integrated, water, energy, food nexus that you can see right away. Classic. This is invisible to policymakers, by the way, at the government level. This is called a jugaad. I think you know this. This is a Hindi word, jugaad. But this is classic. And there's so many running around in there. In fact, the boy who was driving this, it doesn't have a license plate, as you can see. And the boy who was driving this was, I think, 12 years old. I'm sure he didn't have a driving license. No. But it's a reality. You know. Classic another case in that book of ours, Ropeways in Nepal, which you can download. On the top picture was taken by Professor Tony Hagen, the first geologist who mapped the Himalayas in Nepal. You know, you see, man crossing a Arun River on a rope. You know, it's changed now to something more better with cables and more safe stuff. You see girls going to school on one of these things in Nepal. But instead of developing this, which is much more energy efficient, climate friendly and mountain friendly, we have opted for this road building in the Himalayas, the picture you see on the bottom right, you know, which is massively causing landslides, massively raising the bed level also in the Tarai and in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, you know, because the siltation that not siltation, it's mass wasting, it boulders and pebbles coming down, you know. So what is happening is that, you know, our technological choices are rife with values. It's not value free. Just because an engineer said it, it doesn't make it true. You know, they are propagating something that would fit their own worldview and their style of what development is. So this is where Bikas and Kubikas, Subikas and Kubikas comes in, you know. This is where we make mistakes. We think that international treaties or policies are what countries come together to do and agree with the consensus. The reality is that you have cross-cutting realities across nation states of environmental activists, multinational corporations, scientific and professional groups, non-governmental social organizations. They cut through. You know, my loyalty to my scientific and professional groups across the world, frankly, I should say, is higher than my loyalty to my government. Yeah, I'm more or less loyal to my government. I'm a big critic, you know. But yeah, okay, I carry a Nepali passport. Nepali government, okay. But, you know, I would be more worried what my scientific colleague in India or Sri Lanka or Pakistan or, you know, let's say Kenya say, or America or England, than what my government would say about me. Half the time I don't really give a damn what my government says, because I'm critiquing them all the time. So this new reality is where cultural theory says we should be focusing on. You know. Finally, what I would argue is that, you know, in understanding this localization and understanding this evaluating traditional knowledges, the triangle, the three-legged policies tool that I showed you, is actually very distorted in our part of the world. Governments are not really trustees that they should be. They are into the rent-seeking license Raj, as we call it. It's a distortion. Markets are not really competitive with the hidden hand. What they are is crony capitalism. You know, tied up with a couple of politicians making big, you know, contract thekapattas and so on and so forth. This is not a market. It's a perversity. Okay? And finally, NGOs also, unfortunately, in the 80s and 90s, were doing real activism. Anil Agrawal is a classic case, you know. Okay. But what has happened in the 21st century is they have become not NGOs, they have become bongos, dongos, gongos, and pongos, as I call them. Business organized NGOs, donor organized NGOs, government organized NGOs, and the worst in Nepal, party affiliated and party organized NGOs, pongos, you know. So these distort policy terrain completely, and we argue in this book that, you know, you have to restore the development dharma, which means each one of them must be doing their own dharma, you know, and not, you know, distorting their own dharma. Okay? So this would lead to better water solutions. This would lead to an appreciation of the empirical findings of thousands of years of what people have actually seen that is appropriate to their hydroecology. I'll close by one simple observation. Many years ago when I was studying in the Soviet Union, I made my trip. We would go by train all the way from Moscow to London, you know. Along the way, stop in Poland, East Berlin, and all that. And my first trip to London in 1976, I think it was, or 66. And what happened was I was hoping to see London, we read about London, Charles Dickens, gloomy, foggy London. No, you've seen that, huh? I come to London, and the sky was way bluer than what you have this for a whole month. There was a massive drought. There was crisis all over, drought. My image of England and London completely vanished. You know, it's the kind of weather you get in October in this part of the world, you know, blue sky and all, like full month, not a cloud. Okay. So I was studying hydropower, so I was interested what is this drought they have. And I was shocked to learn that the British definition, you know, your erstwhile rulers, you know, not ours, in Nepal we were never under a colony. Their definition of drought is 3 weeks without rain. My God, we have 3, 4, 5, 6 months without a drop of rain. That's our hydroecology. Which is why the technologies we use must be commensurate with that hydroecology. Unfortunately, we have imported the Roorkee model from England, the Dutch model, from whatever in building embankments, and not really looked at what we should have really looked at, which is how do you take care of floods? You don't build embankments, because embankments destroy. In Bihar, for instance, D.K. Mishra, you just got to read him, More land has gone out of production through waterlogging in Bihar due to embankments than has come under the Kosi project. It's a perversity. Why? Because embankments may be fine for Arizona, the desert. It may be fine for, I don't know, Rajasthan, wherever, The trouble is, in our part of the world, so much rain falls all over that even outside the embankment there's rain. So when you build, when the rain subsides, the river goes down, all that accumulated water goes into the river. You build embankments, what happens? That accumulated water can't come into the river, and because waterlogging. In Bihar, I have seen fertile land submerged throughout the year with water, farmers having to migrate to Delhi, rich farmers owning 20, 50 bighas of land, migrating to pull rickshaws in Delhi. So this is the consequence of bad technological choices, which is what has to be challenged by activist egalitarianism. Thank you.
What percentage of indigenous knowledge plus as modernization, like we are in an age of modernization, AI, everyone wants easy tasks. No one's in this world won't rely on this indigenous things like time-taking things. So what's on your views as you spent 20 years in the government?
More than that, yeah, okay, yeah.
What percentage of in indigenous things and what percentage of in like fast-growing things? Like the governments are doing, making flyovers, tunnels.
Yeah, I got the point. Okay, I must disappoint you because I am, in my studies in the Soviet Union, one thing I learned was that the Russians had a great expression: human versus tech-int, technical intelligence versus human intelligence. Americans were good at technical intelligence. They had satellites, they had this, they had that, better than the Russians those days, but I think the Russians have become very good now also, Whereas human intelligence, the difference is tech-int produces data. Now, that data does not become information, it remains as noise, okay? It is human and the quality of human intelligence that has to take all that tech-int and any other intelligence that comes by, process it, and come to a decision. Which is why I am highly skeptical of AI. Yeah, AI is a good tool, it's an amazing tool, okay? But ultimate decision has to be made by the human mind sitting up there, weighing the different things, taking risk, weighing, and finally saying, okay, based on all this, I take this as data, this data as information, this data as noise, filter it out. We do that filtering out all the time, okay? And then take a decision and be responsible for that decision. How AI is portrayed right now is as if it's such a miracle that, you don't have to do anything. You sit on a couch scratching your belly and AI will do everything for you. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen, okay? Ultimately, the challenge now is how human reinterprets AI, ultimately. And we are very poor at that. The Russians and the Chinese are really good at it, And so this is where we really have to, begin to think. So I am extremely skeptical of this so-called modern thing that's done faster by governments and this and that. And say, wait a minute, what the hell? Like in Nepal, there's a big talk about building this highway or train to India and China and all that. We don't have it, So my big question is, okay, what are you going to put on that bloody train? All that's going to do is make Chinese goods even much cheaper in Nepal. That's all it's going to do, or Indian goods for that matter. And in fact, Chinese will be much cheaper than Indian goods. And much of that will, end up coming into India anyway. The question is, what is your economy? What is your localization? What is your need? What are those information that you really need to take that very, very, very local decision? And that's not happening to a sufficient amount. So I would argue that, try focusing on human and look at tech-int, including AI, as just a tool and assess that to see how much of what it produces is noise and how much of it really is intelligence. I hope I've disappointed you. Yeah. Yeah.
When anyone elect a government, maybe Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, anywhere in the world, they want development. Very few population of us wants, the indigenous wants things to be protected. So
No, it's not only protected. I'll tell you. I mean, in Nepal, there's now a new fight brewing because, you also had talked about community forestry in Nepal. It's a big success story. One of the things I managed to do in my short term as a minister was initiate community electricity, where communities manage their own distribution, buying electricity in bulk from the national grid and retailing by themselves. Amazing creativity in how they used electricity. There are 300 groups across Nepal, community electricity, community forestry, much more. Okay. Now, what is interesting here is that our fight with community forestry now is 70s there was deforestation all over here also. In Nepal it got completely reversed, and today we have far more forest cover than we ever did in our history, thanks to community forestry. Okay? Now the question is, the forest ministry still controls everything in such a way that if I grow some trees in my farm and you want to buy some of that wood, I chop up that tree and bring it on a truck to you, the forest department can stop me in mid-highway and then seize the truck. Okay. So wait a minute, now we are importing in Nepal with all the forests, we are importing timber from Malaysia, by the way. Okay? So this is a perversity. It's an absolute perversity. Okay? So the question is, we should now go change our slogan from preservation. I was triggered by your use of word preservation. No, it's not ban samrakshan. It's ban sadupayog. Wise use of forest, which subsumes samrakshan. You have to do some samrakshan to do sadupayog. Okay? So I think one problem I am noticing, and this is influencing us in Nepal, although we are much slightly different, having not been a colony, is that we do not, in Nepal, deify our government as much as I see in India. In India, there's an absolute deification of government and government structure and government ministries that I find absent in Nepal. It is there, you respect your government and all that, but we are quite prone to saying, ye sab sale chor hai, okay, much easier. But here there is this assumption that everything, what does the government do, what is the government policy? No, you have to go for activist policies first and put pressure on the government to make changes accordingly, and that is missing. It was there in the 80s and 90s. It's missing now. So this is what I'm arguing for, is a revival to get better indigenous knowledge and indigenous desires, wants, hopes, balanced out. Otherwise, you get somebody sitting in Delhi or somebody sitting in Kathmandu or, I don't know, Dhaka, deciding the fate of millions without even understanding what it is that's really going on down there.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for your highly energetic and thought-provoking words. The way you focused on the alarming situation of global economy, and also focus on the idea of localization, how it carries the essence of indigeneity, and showing us a new dimension how climate problem is also a water problem. And thank you, participant, for your queries, for making this session highly interactive. Now, as we draw to the end of our inaugural session, I request my co-convener, Pikli Buragohai from the Department of English, to deliver the vote of thanks. Immediately after the vote of thanks, we will move to the college canteen for high tea.
At the outset, I express my heartfelt gratitude to the President of our governing body, Dr. Harad Dutta, for his constant encouragement and support. I am equally grateful to our respected principal, Dr. Kulen Chandra Das, for his guidance and leadership in making this conference a success. I extend my sincere thanks to our distinguished resource persons, Dr. Charmali Nahalage, who has traveled all the way from Sri Lanka, and Professor Deepak Gawali, who has come from Nepal, for sharing their valuable insights and enriching this academic gathering. I would also like to express a deep appreciation to our sponsors, OIL, SBI, and WWF. Without their generous support, this conference would not have been possible. We are especially thankful to WWF for collaborating with us in organizing this important event. My special thanks go to Dr. Anupam Sharma for delivering the inaugural address and setting the tone for this conference. I would like to acknowledge the efforts of Dr. Sanchita Bora, coordinator of IQAC, and Dr. Mridula Kashyap, convener of the conference, whose dedication and hard work have been instrumental in the successful organization of this event. I also extend my gratitude to my fellow co-conveners, all the members of the organizing committee, my colleagues, including both teaching and non-teaching staff, for the tireless efforts. A special mention goes to our very enthusiastic student volunteers from NCC, NSS, and the union body, as well as all the students of the college for their active participation and support. Finally, I thank all the paper presenters and the dignitaries present here for their valuable contributions, which have truly enriched the academic spirit of this conference. With this, I conclude the vote of thanks. Thank you all for your presence and participation.